Answer a question at the PG level, especially in English literature, is itself a question which often bothers the students. So I thought I would say a few things about it. The most important thing is at the postgraduate level, and in fact, in ideal situations, even at the English honors level, what is expected is not so much information but arguments, logically reasoned arguments, or some kind of a development which has been made out of the information that is made generally available to students. Of course, this does not apply to if there are very short answer type questions and all. Those things have to be dealt with at the information level only. But for instance, if there is a question by SS Alfred Tennyson as a Victorian poet, for instance. So, what is to be done here is that the student has to establish primarily two things. One is that outlining the dominant or prominent features of Victorian poetry. All features cannot be exhausted in an answer, exam answer, and then to show how these are available in Tennyson's works. Definitely, at one level, some information will be there because the dominant features of Victorian poetry, for instance, cannot be the student's own finding, but at yet another level, the same thing could be reconstructed or even deconstructed by better students. For example, when I was an undergraduate student, two of my great teachers were divided on the opinion of this opinion on the status of Victorian poetry itself. I won't name them, both were great, and one is no more. So, according to one teacher, Victorian poetry was, or let us say, is essentially a continuation of Romantic poetry, whereas the other teacher, very learned and very scholarly, established with reasoning and some facts, of course, that Victorian poetry is not at all a continuation of Romantic poetry. So these are this is a practical instance of how the same information, obviously, the two teachers that I have named cannot or could not generate fresh information about Romantic or say Victorian poetry on their own. But the available information, the poets, their poem, the spirit of the age, all this led them to two different conclusions. There can be a third way, of course, which is commonly followed by most histories of literature, that it is partially a continuation and partially a discontinuation, which is, of course, the same thing that can be said about, say, modern and postmodernism. So, in many cases, there are no radical breaks with past, even when seemingly an utterly new thing emerges. So, this is just one of the instances. So, instead of giving, for instance, you have to write an answer on King Lear, any topic related to Lear. In my view, the factual inputs which many students want to give as much as they can should be limited. So, King Lear, it is based on the pagan history of Britain, Lear's three daughters, and what happens in the play. Your examiner knows all of this or all this. And here there is a difference between science, political science, other subjects, and literature, I would say. The examiner would be more interested in what you are making of these facts in your responses to King Lear. So, depending on situation, for instance, so let us take another example, The Merchant of Venice. Uh, though I am not very interested in the taxonomic classification of plays, but sometimes these are necessary. Say, would you like to call it a comedy or romantic comedy or tragicomedy. Both the views are possible. I'll give an instance. In New Cambridge Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, edited by M. Mahood, scholarly critic, the play has been categorized as a romantic comedy, clear cut. Whereas in our very commonly used, fairly commonly used kind of roadmap for initial studies of literature, that is M.H. Abrams, Merchant of Venice, is shown as a perfect example of a tragicomedy. Go to the section tragicomedy or entry, then you will find it. So you have to create your own interpretation based on the same play, same facts. So what I was saying is that, especially when broad answer type questions are concerned, unless the question directs it, it also depends on the question. There may be one or two questions which will tell you, enumerate the features of such and such poems, I mean school of poetry and all this, then it has to be factual. But otherwise, most questions in literature, they are related more to interpretation of facts than facts, and these interpretations of necessity vary from students to students, and there is where your originality lies. Remember, I'm talking about the postgraduate level mostly, and this prepares one for the research level when everything will be highly individualistic. So I hope this talk, small talk, would be useful, especially for those who want to do really good in literature and score very high. And scoring in itself is, of course, important, but not the only important thing. Genuine good score implies that the person or the student has internalized the basic mechanism of responding to a literary question or a question in a literature course, as you like it. Thank you so much. After a long time, I have come back and I'm happy to be with all of you, and will continue more regularly from now on. Thank you all for being with us.